my takeaway when all of this was going on is that someone has information on our opponent. This is 13 months ago, before I think the rest of the world was talking about that, trying to build up this narrative about Russia. So I don't even think my sirens, went up, or the antennas went up at this time because of it, because it wasn't the issue that it's been made out to be over the last, 9 months, 10 months.
On its face, this is very problematic. We cannot allow foreign governments to reach out to anybody's campaign and say, we'd like to help you. That is a non-starter.
We're now beyond obstruction of justice in terms of what's being investigated. This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
Well, some of the reaction, as you heard Donald Trump Jr. speaking to Sean Hannity. We'll have another clip of that in just moments. He speaks tonight at 10 p.m. But this is all over an email chain that Donald Trump Jr. released himself today, hours before we expect the New York Times had a story about that very email chain. In these emails, it talks about setting up a meeting June 9th, 2016. Rob Goldstone, a publicist to Donald Trump Jr., the Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aras, this morning. In their meeting, offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to her father. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump, helped along by Aras and Emin. What do you think is the best way to handle this information, and would you be able to speak to Emin about it directly? Emin has another contact through the Miss Universe with the Trumps. I can also send this info to your father via Rona, that's Trump's assistant at Trump Tower, but it is ultra sensitive, so wanted to send to you first. Donald Trump Jr. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. I'm on the road at the moment, but perhaps I just speak to Emin first. Seems we have some time, and if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief for the Weekly Standard. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. And Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for Axios. Jonathan, welcome back. Your thoughts, reaction from the White House, and what you're hearing.
So the White House, internally, there's really two trains of thought, and they're both happening simultaneously. One is, who leaked this?
The email thread.
Well, what the view is internally is the first and the last stories were probably leaked by opponents of theirs, possibly people in the intelligence community. It's the second story by the New York Times that cites 3 advisors to the White House. That's the story that everyone's focused on, and they're wondering, who are these people? And of course, there's a view internally that if once the first thing's out, there's then a race to burn your rivals, cover your back, and that opens up all sorts of possibilities. So it's created this atmosphere internally where no one trusts anyone. They're all throwing out names, discussing, could it be this person, could it be that person? It's opening up all the factions internally, and they're blaming people outside as well. So it's a crazy environment there. As for the substance of it, they're not even trying to pretend this is not bad. Like, privately, they're saying this is a really bad story, it's terrible. The one thing they do say, though, is there is no crime. This is all about, this is a perception problem, not a crime problem. So that's the line that they're sort of testing out. And I'd just say point number 3 is I would expect them to turn this on Obama. That's what I'm already hearing internally, is saying the real story is, Obama's unmasking and intelligence, and that comes from the very top. Donald Trump himself says that. The
political problem, Mercedes, is what White House aides and Donald Trump Jr. himself had said previously about no efforts to meet with Russians, no efforts on collusion, on any effort to take down Hillary with the Russians. And that's the problem in this case. Is that right?
Well, there's several problems, that being one of them, in terms of them saying that they don't recall having these meetings with Russians, then this happens. So it brings up a second question, which I'm hearing out in the legal community, which is there a chance that there's more of these meetings? Are there more contacts out there that the campaign had with the Russians? My question is, where was the campaign lawyer during this process? In terms of when you're in a campaign, your campaign lawyer is critical instrumental in helping to vet a lot of these meetings, for example. I think the mere fact that it was such a decentralized campaign with the family members running it to a certain extent, it creates a bit of a disservice because of the fact that they're not understanding that there could be legal ramifications for the actions they've taken.
Understood that, but I mean, if Paul Manafort goes to that meeting as campaign manager, he has decades of experience in politics.
Yeah.
Jared Kushner is a different story as far as his political experience, but they're in that meeting. They have to know something before they get in the meeting, right?
That's what it appears at this point, but I do believe that they didn't know what they didn't know. They thought that this was they believed this was going to be a meeting to figure out if there was information on Clinton. When you look at it from a legal perspective and you look at the cases out there, for example, Blumen versus the FEC, it does restrict what foreign nationals can do, which is out of spending money or spending money on candidates or express advocacy. So I think from a legal perspective, Donald Trump Jr. is probably in a better spot than he is. The question becomes that the Democrats are now pushing this narrative of treason, where I think they're overplaying their hand, Brett. I don't think that's where they should be going, because at the end, I just feel that Donald Trump Jr. and the team didn't necessarily know that this could create a problem.
Steve.
Look, the story here is not President Obama. It's not the deep state. It's not the media. It's not the Democrats. It's Donald Trump Jr. and these emails. I mean, this doesn't require interpretation. This isn't coming through the filter of the New York Times. The emails say what they say. And this is one of those moments where you have to stop and think, are we really having a debate in this country, in Washington, about the propriety of the son of a presidential candidate, a leading presidential candidate, meeting with representatives whom he thought were of a hostile foreign power for the purposes of winning election, and we have to have a debate about whether that's proper or not? I mean, that's an incredible moment in our history that we're having this debate. I mean, I think you're right on the legal question. Democrats are overplaying their hands. There's some question, talking to some lawyers today, about whether he would be in legal jeopardy or not. Probably not. But that seems to me to be a different debate, and it almost misses the point of what we've learned over the past 3 days. Remember, just 3 or 4 days ago, the story from the Trump campaign was no contacts. Then the story was a harmless meeting about adoptions. Then the story was a meeting to get information about Hillary Clinton. Then the story after that was a supposed representative of the Russian government coming to provide this information so Trump could win an election. And when that's an incredible moment.
Trump supporters push back and they say, no, how is she with the Russian government? Well, I mean, the email says, if you believe Rob Goldstone in the setting up of the meeting, that she's representing or somehow representing the Russian government and its efforts to help the Trump campaign. She goes on to tell NBC she was not working for the Russian government at the time.
No, even worse, she was working for Fusion GPS, who was a private contractor, it's a group that released a dossier. So, and then you have to ask yourself the question, how did she get a visa? I mean, there's all these other questions that I think that need to be asked. And actually, Fusion GPS is stonewalling the congressional investigation right now. So I think those are a second set of questions that need to be asked.
You were going to finish your point, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the Fusion GPS, there are questions there. We should get answers to the questions, I think, through the investigation, both either the congressional investigations or Bob Mueller's. We will get answers to those. But the fact of the matter is, she represented herself, or Mr. Blackstone represented her as a representative of the Russian government. Yeah, Goldstone, of the Russian government. And Donald Trump Jr. took the meeting with the intention of colluding. I mean, I think that is the problem here. That's the big takeaway. Whatever all of the rest of this is.
I think certainly talking to people inside, one of the biggest problems is the credibility gap that opens up now, because their line has been, until, as Steve pointed out very recently, this whole thing is phony. There's nothing to it. In fact, it's not only phony, it's ridiculous that you would even suggest that we knew any Russians or dealt with any Russians. And then we have this amazing timeline now where you have the email dated June, whatever it was, where he heard that this was the Russian government, and then a month later you have Don Jr. on television with Jake Tapper on CNN saying this whole thing's ridiculous.